Isn't it a great day to be a Christian? Open your Bibles to Genesis. Genesis chapter 37. Seems that in America the family is under constant attack. In California there's a new law awaiting the governor's signature that would forbid anyone from a school to notify a student's parents if that little boy decided that she wanted to be a little girl, or if the little girl decided that he wanted to be a little boy, or the other way around. Anyway, the boy wanted to be a girl, couldn't tell the parents. It'd be against the law. It'd be illegal for somebody from the school to tell the parents about that. Poor school performance, increased dropout rates, juvenile crime, juvenile delinquency, all those are statistically linked to problems in the family, the breakdown of the family unit. We think about this being a modern phenomenon, but way back in the Old Testament, we read about one of the most dysfunctional families in history. In Genesis, we read about a family. The head of this clan was a man named Jacob. Now, unlike most normal families, it wasn't Mr. and Mrs. Jacob and the kids. Jacob had two wives. And it just happened that these wives were sisters and they didn't get along. And on top of all that, he had two concubines. Now, if you look up concubine in the dictionary, it says a concubine is a woman who lives with a man but has lower status than a wife. Synonyms include mistress or kept woman. So you can see how this would create some problems on the home front. Here's this man, he's got 4 different women that's living with him. And on top of all that, each of those women had given him some children. So he had children by 4 different women, and the kids didn't get along either. And so we've got a big mess that's brewing. Now part of that is due to the fact that the women that had children wanted their children to be the favorites. And part of it was because it was Jacob's fault, because he had a favorite. He had a favorite wife, and he had a favorite child, and his favorite child was a boy named Joseph. And that's who our lesson is about tonight. Jacob's favorite child, Joseph, and the trials and the temptations that he faced. So let's begin reading in Genesis chapter 37, verse 3. So now Israel, that's Jacob, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now, it wasn't Joseph's fault that his mama was Jacob's favorite wife. And it wasn't Joseph's fault that Jacob gave him this coat of many colors. It wasn't Joseph's fault that he was born when Jacob was an old man. He took extra pride in that, and he thought special about Joseph. Maybe he was a little softer on him than he'd been to his big brothers, and big brothers wouldn't like that. You never treated me that way. How come he gets all the special treatment? So if that was the entire story, then we could say, well, Joseph was just a victim of circumstances. He didn't have anything to do with this. But that wasn't the whole story. We started in verse 3. If you go up just a little bit, back in verse 2, it says that Joseph was out feeding his flock with his brothers, and he brought unto his father their evil report. Joseph was a tattletale. Joseph was a snitch. Joseph went out and saw his brothers doing something they weren't supposed to do, and he made sure that Daddy knew about it because he wanted to get brothers in trouble. On top of that, verse 5 says, and Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. Joseph dreamed a dream. Now we find out later in the story that this was a prophetic vision from God, and it was going to be fulfilled, and it would be a blessing to all the Jews. But Joseph could have dreamed that dream and kept it to himself. He could have dreamed that dream and said, oh, God's got a special purpose for me, or I'm going to be the head of my family. All my brothers are going to bow down before me. But Joseph didn't do that. Joseph dreamed a dream, and he's told his brethren. The Bible doesn't say this, but you kind of get the idea that Joseph was a brat. And Joseph, here, this 17-year-old boy, he dreams this dream. He said, oh, I'm going to be large and in charge. All these older brothers, they're grown men. He's 17. And he said, y'all all going to bow down before me. I'm going to be the most important. And he liked rubbing it in, and his brothers hated him because of it. Verse 6, he said unto them, hear I pray you this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. Now, obeisance is not a word that we use in current English. Back in 1611, people would say things like that when the King James Version was translated. I looked up obeisance. We don't use it in normal conversation, but it means paying deferential respect. And some of the things that it says goes along with obeisance, signs of obeisance would be bowing and curtsying. You're humbling yourself before other people. And Joseph said, that's what y'all were doing to me. And you can imagine his big brothers didn't like that very much. Verse 8, and his brethren said unto him, shalt thou indeed reign over us? Or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. So far, Joseph's just digging his hole a little bit deeper. His brothers already hated him to start with because he was daddy's favorite, and now he's rubbing it in. Did he learn his lesson? No, look at verse 9. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. He said, hey, guess what? It's even better. He told his brothers, now we're not told their immediate feedback, but this time he told his father about it, and Jacob wasn't pleased. Look at verse 10. He told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? Joseph wasn't thrilled. He said, what do you mean I'm going to bow down before you, boy? He didn't like it very much, but he didn't punish Joseph. In fact, you get the idea that maybe he never punished Joseph. Joseph didn't seem to get in trouble. Joseph was the baby. Joseph seemed to be a little bit spoiled, and that plays out in the next few verses. In verse 12, Jacob sent his older brothers out to tend the flock, but Joseph didn't have to go. Joseph got to stay at home. Verse 13, he decided to send Joseph out to check on his brothers. They're supposed to be in Shechem, but when Joseph got there, they were gone. Somebody told him that they'd gone to Dothan, so he started looking for them. Have you ever wondered what Joseph was thinking when he was going looking for his brothers? Could he be thinking, just wait till I tell Daddy about this? He told them to go to Shechem, and they've gone to Dothan. I'm going to tell when I get home. We don't know for sure what Joseph was thinking when he found his brothers, but we know what his brothers were thinking when they saw Joseph. Look at verse 18. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, behold, the dreamer cometh. Come now therefore, let us slay him and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. Okay? 3 times in this chapter, we've already read how his brothers hated Joseph. Now we see they hated him so much that they wanted to kill him. And perhaps they would have, but Reuben intervened. Look at verse 21. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him. Now it tells why Reuben said that. He said, let's don't kill him, let's just throw him into this pit. Apparently he said, we'll just leave him there and see what happens. But the rest of that verse says that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father. So Reuben had a plan. He was going to have him throw Joseph in a pit. He was going to come back later, get him out, take him home to Daddy. We don't know if Reuben hated Joseph less than the other brothers. He felt sorry for him. Or if Reuben just knew that Jacob loved Joseph and that it would really hurt him if he didn't come home. But anyway, they agreed that's what they'd do. So they threw Joseph into this dry pit. They stripped off his fancy coat. And then they sat down to eat. Now, we don't know where Reuben went during this time, but apparently he wandered off. I don't know if they were working in shifts. Some were tending the sheep while others were eating dinner. We don't know, but look at verse 25. It says, and they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. I've always been amazed at this next line. It says, for he is our brother and our flesh. I mean, think about it. Let's don't leave him in this pit. Let's don't kill him. Let's sell him as a slave. After all, he is our brother. Can you imagine your brother saying, let's sell this guy. Let's get rid of him. I hope none of your family members are like this. But apparently all of Joseph's brothers were, because it says, and his brethren were content. That's a good idea. We'll do this. Now they had to take care of some details. They took his coat, they killed a goat, they dipped the coat in blood. They took it back to Jacob and said, look, we found this. And they let Jacob think that some wild animal had killed his son. In the meantime, they acted like they were really concerned. They tried to console their father. And now they don't have to deal with their smart aleck little brother anymore. He's on his way off to Egypt. They're rid of him. I read that it's at least a 15-day journey by a camel train from Dothan to Egypt. Have you ever wondered what was going through Joseph's mind on that trip? I mean, here he is. He's been sold as a slave. His daddy thinks he's dead. He doesn't know if he's ever going to see his home or his father again. Was he wondering why his brothers had done this to him? Or was he thinking, I know why my brothers did this to me. I was a jerk. I need to repent. I need to go back and apologize. If I ever get out of this, I'm going to make things right. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. Or was he saying, if I ever get out of here, I'm going to fix them. Just wait till I get done. Just wait till I tell Daddy about what they've done now. What do you think would have happened if Joseph could have gotten to his father right then? Don't know, but it probably wouldn't have been good for his brothers. So far, Joseph and his brothers are 0 for 2 when it comes to facing temptation. He was tempted to be arrogant and brag, and he failed. He gave in to that. He was arrogant. He did brag. His brothers were tempted to punish him for his arrogance, and they gave in to their temptation too. And they sold him as a slave, but that's not the end of the story. Go down to verse 36. And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. So Joseph made it to Egypt. The Midianite traders sell him as a slave. Potiphar buys him, and that's the end of chapter 37. Now, for some reason, chapter 38 deals with something totally different, so skip over to chapter 39, and we'll pick up the story right where this left off. Genesis chapter 39, verse 1 says, And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him at the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. And he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. Now Joseph's still a slave, but Joseph's doing pretty well. Everything that Joseph touches seems to be turned into gold, and Potiphar realizes that. And it's obvious to them that God's blessing him through Joseph, and he likes that. Apparently Joseph has done some growing up. We don't see any signs of the Joseph that we saw back when he was at home. He's not trying to stir anything up. He's not saying, well, you may be my owner right now, but one of these days you're going to pay, you're going to be sorry for this. He was doing his best to serve his master, Potiphar, and as a result he was serving God. And God's blessing him as his work. He's still a slave, but he's got all these good things happening. He can have anything he wants in Potiphar's house, and life seems to be going pretty good considering the circumstances, and then temptation strikes again. Look at verse 7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Lie with me. Now, a lot of things could be going through Joseph's mind right now. He could have been physically tempted. He could have said, that sounds like a good idea. He could have sought revenge. You thought you were something being my master owning me, but now I'm going to get your wife. See how bad you are then. Remember, Joseph had been pretty arrogant back home. If he still had that attitude, he could take it out on his master. He could have thought that this was a chance to show Potiphar just how important he was. But this time, Joseph didn't give in to temptation. Verse 8 says, But he refused and said unto his master's wife, Behold, my master wotteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? This time, for the first time, Joseph's not thinking about Joseph. Joseph's thinking about somebody else. Joseph is thinking about God. God comes into the picture, and Joseph resists the temptation. He gave in to the temptation before to be arrogant because it made him feel big. But now he says, I can't do this because that would be a sin against God. So Joseph stands up to temptation. Joseph resists the temptation. He does what God wants him to do, and he gets punished anyway. When Joseph wouldn't sin with Potiphar's wife, she made up some story about him trying to attack her. He left his coat behind. She gave it to Potiphar, said, look, but this slave that you brought into the house, he tried to attack me. And verse 20 says, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. And just for a moment, picture yourself in Joseph's place. You're hundreds of miles from home. Your brothers have sold you as a slave. You've worked hard to earn the trust of this man that is your master. And in spite of your spotless record of service, somebody lies about you, and you've been put into jail. This would be the time to give up. This would be the time to say, okay, maybe I was a jerk at home and my brothers had an excuse to sell me into slavery, but I didn't do anything this time. I'm innocent this time. I don't deserve this. Why is this happening to me? Why is God punishing me this way? Joseph didn't say any of that. Joseph maintained his integrity, and as a result, God blessed him for it. Go down to verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. It's easy to become discouraged when you don't have all the answers. So what did Joseph do? Well, apparently he had faith as God was going to get him out of this. It didn't take long before the keeper of the prison saw the same thing in Joseph that Potiphar had seen. God's working. God's working through Joseph. So Joseph was put in charge of the prison, and he was being faithful to God. He was serving. Life is going to be full of problems. Suffering is inevitable, but misery is optional. Joseph was suffering, but he wasn't miserable. He was working for God. He trusted that God got him out of that pit, and God could get him out of this prison. When we're desperate for God to change things, we need to look back and think about the faith that Joseph had, and do what Joseph did and serve as if he was serving God. So Joseph decides to honor God no matter what goes on. And now let's go to chapter 40. Genesis chapter 40, verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in the ward. So now there are two new prisoners in the prison, and Joseph's seeing after them. Pharaoh's head baker and head butler. These are two very important characters in the court of Pharaoh. Poisoning was a common occurrence back then. And the chief baker would be the one that was watching after the king's food, make sure somebody didn't slip some poison in the food. The chief butler is translated in other versions as the chief cupbearer. So he'd be tasting all the king's drinks to make sure that they were all safe. They were important people. Apparently they'd done something to the king and put him in prison, and Joseph was entrusted to their care. It says they were there for a season. We don't know how long a season was, but apparently they'd been here a while, and then one night they had this troubling dream. I want you to notice what happened the next morning. Here's Joseph, hundreds of miles away from home, being mistreated, sold by his brothers, falsely imprisoned. Look at verse 6. Joseph came into them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of the Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? Joseph could have been feeling really sorry for himself, and then he sees these two guys, and he says, What's wrong, guys? Why are you looking so sad? Are you having a bad day? How many of you, when you're feeling picked on, when you're feeling mistreated, when you're feeling down and out, notice when somebody else is feeling bad. We get so wrapped up in our own self-pity that we don't look and see what other people are doing. That wasn't Joseph. Joseph had what we call empathy. He's concerned about the welfare of these two prisoners. So he goes, he sees they're having problems. He's concerned about them. And so he goes and talks to them. Wherefore look ye so sadly today? What is wrong with you two? Verse 8, they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. Notice the change in Joseph. Before, when he had a dream, he knew what the answer is. Y'all all going to bow down before me. Now these officers of the Pharaoh have a dream, and he says, God can tell you the answer. God can answer this for you. He didn't say, I can do it. He says, God can do it. So the cupbearer tells Joseph his dream. And Joseph gives him the interpretation. He tells him in 3 days, he's going to be back in Pharaoh's court, putting Pharaoh's cup in his hand again. And then Joseph asks the butler a favor. Look at verse 14. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. Joseph tells this man, he said, this is all going to work out for you. You're going to go back to Pharaoh. You're going to get your job back. Everything's going to be good. When it happens, do me a favor. Tell Pharaoh what's happened to me. Tell him I'm down here. I don't deserve this. I was made a slave. I didn't deserve to even be a slave. I didn't do anything to get put in jail. Go tell Pharaoh they got an innocent man in here. Get me out. Well, the baker sees that the butler gets good news, so he goes and tells Joseph his dream too. Joseph said, I'm sorry, I ain't got good news for you. 3 days you're going to be executed. 3 days pass. The baker's executed. The butler is returned to his place. Do you ever wonder what's going through Joseph's mind now? He thinks, okay, he got out. He knows that I am innocent. He knows that I can interpret God's dream. He knows that things are wrong. He's got to be pretty impressed of everything that's happened, just like I said it would. Now, he's probably not going to say anything today. This is his first day back. He's got to get everything organized and get his job going. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. Maybe next month. How long do you think it took Joseph before he realized what verse 23 says? Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. How long do you think Joseph was there before he said, he forgot about me? Nobody's coming. I'm not going to get out of here. But it didn't work out. Now we all realize that that's not the end of the story. But Joseph didn't. What's going to keep Joseph going in the dungeon? Well, the same thing that's kept Joseph going up until this time. Lord willing, 2 weeks from tonight, we'll take up Joseph here in the prison and we'll see what happens next. But have you ever been in a situation like that? Have you ever been somewhere you wonder, why is this happening to me? Why isn't somebody helping me? I've done favors for other people. I've helped them. Why are they not helping me when I need help? Romans 8:28 is probably one of the most misapplied verses in the New Testament. It says that we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. A lot of people think that says everything's going to be okay. Some people think that says that everything's going to be okay if you love the Lord. What it says is everything's going to work together for good if we love God and if we live according to his purpose. And that's what Joseph is doing now. Joseph was living for Joseph, but now Joseph is living for God. Joseph didn't lose courage because he knew something better is coming. If you've lost courage tonight, maybe we need to pray for you. Maybe we need to pray with you. To have that promise that everything's going to work out if we live according to his purpose, you need to be a Christian. It's the only life worth living, the only death one would dare to die. If things are not okay with you, somebody said everything's going to work out for Christians in the end. If it's not okay, then this is not the end. But if you need help, if you're struggling, if there's something we can pray with you about tonight, won't you make it known right now? Let's stand together as we sing.